Story number 1. Whispers on Route 66. The midnight air on Route 66 was crisp, the kind that bit through layers of clothing and settled deep into your bones. I was driving my 18-wheeler, the long-haul truck that had become both my lifeline and my curse. Arizona's vast desert stretched endlessly on either side, the emptiness amplified by the stark glow of the moon reflecting off the asphalt. I had been hauling goods across the country for nearly a decade, each trip blending into the next with little distinction. But that night was different. The silence of the highway was unsettling, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional howl of a distant coyote. My radio was dead, a malfunction that seemed trivial until you were miles from the nearest town with no cell service to rely on. As I cruised down the desolate stretch, the desert around me seemed to close in, the darkness pressing against the windows of my cab. My thoughts wandered to home, my wife, Lisa, and our daughter, Emily. They were safe, snug in our house in Chicago, oblivious to the solitary figure navigating the endless road miles away. It was around 2 a.m. when I first saw her. A lone figure standing by the roadside, illuminated by the weak beam of my truck's headlights. She was a woman, her dress old-fashioned and tattered, the fabric fluttering gently in the breeze. She stood motionless, waving her arms frantically, her face pale and eyes wide with desperation. "Hello?" I called out, slowing the truck to a halt. She didn't respond, just kept waving, her movements becoming more frantic. I parked safely on the shoulder, shutting off the engine. The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the sound of my own breathing and the distant wind. "Are you okay?" I asked again, stepping out into the cold night. My breath visible in the frigid air, I approached her cautiously. She stared at me with those hollow eyes, her mouth moving but no sound escaping. My heart raced, a mix of concern and unease tightening my chest. I reached out a hand, but as soon as I did, she vanished into thin air, leaving me standing alone on the deserted highway. Confusion washed over me. Had I imagined it? The long hours on the road had frayed my nerves, but this felt too real. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unsettling feeling, and got back into the truck. As I resumed driving, my mind raced with questions. Who was she? Why was she out here at this hour? A few miles down the road, the temperature in the cab dropped noticeably. My breath became visible again, despite the heater running at full blast. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and there she was, sitting in the back seat, her eyes still empty, staring directly at me. I slammed my hand on the dashboard, jolting myself out of the trance. "Get out," I muttered to myself, turning around to see if she was still there. The back seat was empty, the only sign of her presence the lingering chill in the air. Panic began to set in as I tried to shake off the eerie encounter. My hands trembled on the wheel, my mind struggling to make sense of what I had just experienced. The whispering began then, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves. "Don't leave me." I spun the truck around, scanning the empty road, but there was no one in sight. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, filling the cabin with a haunting melody that seemed to resonate deep within my soul. "Stay with me," the voices pleaded, blending into a chorus of sorrow and desperation. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, trying to steady my nerves. "Leave me alone," I demanded, my voice cracking under the weight of fear. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the edges of the windows. The headlights flickered, casting long, distorted shadows across the interior of the truck. My heart pounded in my chest as the whispers turned into anguished cries, the voices seeming to emanate from all around me. In a desperate bid for escape, I accelerated, the engine roaring to life as I sped down the highway. The darkness outside became a blur, the snow swirling in violent gusts that reduced visibility to almost nothing. The voices continued to haunt me, their presence unyielding, as if the very air was charged with their sorrow. As I drove, I felt a growing sense of dread, the realization that whatever was after me couldn't be seen or touched, only felt through the oppressive atmosphere and the relentless whispers. My mind raced, searching for rational explanations, but nothing made sense. The long-haul truck had become a prison of shadows and voices, trapping me in a nightmare that seemed to have no end. Minutes felt like hours as I navigated the treacherous road, the storm outside intensifying with each passing moment. Lightning illuminated the sky, revealing fleeting glimpses of spectral figures standing by the roadside, their eyes empty and haunting. They seemed to materialize and disappear with each flash, their presence both terrifying and mesmerizing. "Please, don't leave." The voices echoed, their plea never wavering. The storm raged on, the wind howling like a banshee, the snow piling higher against the windows. The truck's headlights barely pierced the blinding whiteness, guiding me through the endless night. Exhausted and on the brink of madness, I finally saw the lights of a small town in the distance. Relief washed over me as I approached the sign for Willow Springs, a remote community known for its quaint charm and welcoming locals. My heart lifted, the voices momentarily silenced as I entered the town, the storm beginning to subside. I pulled into a vacant gas station, the neon sign flickering overhead. Stepping out of the truck, I took a deep breath, the cold air now calm and still. The whispers had faded, replaced by the gentle rustling of the wind through the nearby trees. I felt a sense of relief, the nightmare seemingly over. But as I looked back at my truck, I saw her, sitting in the back seat once more, her eyes still empty, her presence as chilling as before. "Don't leave me," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. I stood frozen, unable to move, the realization dawning on me that escaping the highway was no longer an option. The curse of Route 66 had claimed me, trapping me in an eternal loop of fear and desperation. The ghostly woman would always be there, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lurked on the deserted stretches of America's most famous highway. As the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over Willow Springs, I understood that some places hold onto their secrets tightly, their shadows waiting patiently for the next unsuspecting soul to uncover their haunting truths. And so, I remain here, a solitary figure on Route 66, forever bound by the whispers and the sorrow of the ghostly woman who continues to seek solace in the endless night. Story number 2. Whispers at Rest Stop 48. The hum of my 18-wheeler was the only sound breaking the silence of Interstate 80, Nevada. After hours of driving under the relentless desert sun, fatigue had settled deep into my bones. The vast expanse of empty highway stretched endlessly before me, the stark beauty of the desert both mesmerizing and isolating. My name is Tom Harris, and I've spent the last 15 years navigating these lonely roads, hauling goods from coast to coast. Tonight, I needed a break, a few hours of rest before the long haul to California. As I approached Rest Stop 48, a dimly lit sign emerged from the darkness, flickering intermittently. The rest stop was one of the many scattered along this desolate stretch, but something about it felt different tonight. The usual flicker of neon lights and the distant sound of air conditioning were absent. Instead, an eerie stillness hung in the air, broken only by the soft rustling of the desert wind. Pulling into the parking lot, I noticed the absence of other vehicles. No other trucks, no cars, just me in the sprawling silence. I parked my rig, the engine winding down with a reluctant groan. The fatigue was overwhelming, and I decided to stretch my legs and grab a quick snack before retreating to my sleeper cab. The rest stop was quaint, with a small convenience store and a few vending machines. The glow from the store's interior cast long shadows across the parking lot, creating an almost otherworldly ambience. I grabbed a granola bar and a bottle of water, making my way inside to stretch my legs and use the restroom. As I pushed open the door to the restroom, a chill ran down my spine. The interior was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, casting unsettling shadows on the tiled walls. I approached the sink, glancing around to ensure I was alone. The usual hum of the ventilation system was absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Turning my attention to the mirror, I noticed something peculiar. Scribbled in what appeared to be fresh marker ink were the words, "They are here. Don't go back." My heart skipped a beat as I stared at the ominous message, a sense of dread settling over me. I shook my head, dismissing it as graffiti from a prankster, but the unease lingered. I flushed the toilet and washed my hands, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. As I turned to leave, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind me, startling me. My flashlight flickered, struggling to illuminate the otherwise dark restroom. I took a deep breath, telling myself it was just a draft, and made my way back to my truck. But as I stepped outside, I realized something was wrong. My 18-wheeler, which had been parked a few meters away, had been moved. Confused, I approached the vehicle, my eyes scanning the surrounding area for any sign of movement. There were no footprints in the freshly fallen snow that surrounded the rest stop, and no other signs of disturbance except for the lingering feeling of being watched. Heart pounding, I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Probably just my imagination, I muttered to myself. I've been driving too long. As I climbed back into my truck, I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the empty expanse of highway behind me. Instead, I saw her, a woman standing just a few feet behind my vehicle, her eyes hollow and her expression void of emotion. She was dressed in a long, flowing dress, her hair disheveled and covered in dust. Her presence was unsettling, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. She didn't respond. Instead, she raised a hand, her fingers moving in a slow, deliberate motion as if trying to communicate something important. Before I could react, she vanished, leaving me alone once more in the silent desert night. Shaking off the encounter, I decided it was best to get back on the road. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen. It's my dispatcher, Mike. "Tom, you okay out there? Haven't heard from you in a while." I sighed, relieved to hear a familiar voice. "Yeah, Mike. Just taking a break at rest stop 48. Everything's fine." There was a brief pause before Mike spoke again. "Tom, are you sure? We got a report of an abandoned vehicle here earlier tonight. Someone was seen around, but we haven't been able to locate them." I frowned, confusion clouding my thoughts. Abandoned vehicle? I haven't seen anything like that. Mike chuckled nervously. "Probably just another trucker taking a break. Stay safe, all right?" "Will do," I replied, ending the call. The rest stop's strange atmosphere now mingled with the unsettling message and the apparition in my rearview mirror, making me question my sanity. As I drove away, the wind picked up, the snow swirling in frantic patterns around the highway. The desert seemed to stretch on endlessly, the night growing colder with each passing mile. My mind raced with questions. Who was the woman? What did she want? And why was my truck moved? The road ahead was dark, the only light coming from the headlights of my truck slicing through the night. The sense of being watched never fully dissipated, the memory of the chilling message and the haunting figure lingering in the back of my mind. I tried to focus on the road, the monotony of driving slowly lulling me into a state of exhaustion once more. Hours passed, the night inching towards dawn, but the rest stop's eerie presence refused to fade from my thoughts. As I approached a familiar stretch of highway, the early morning light beginning to break through the darkness, I felt a lingering unease that couldn't be shaken off. Just as I was about to let my guard down, I heard a distant, almost imperceptible sound, the faint ringing of a bell, reminiscent of the kind you might hear in old gas stations or historic rest stops. It echoed through the desert, a haunting melody that seemed to call out to me. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see the woman, but there was nothing there. The road was empty, the only sign of life the occasional dust devil swirling in the distance. Shaking my head, I decided to ignore it, chalking it up to the isolation and my overactive imagination. But as I continued driving, the ringing grew louder, more insistent, until it became impossible to ignore. It was as if the sound was emanating from all around me, vibrating through the very fabric of my truck. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, the unease deepening as I tried to locate the source of the noise. The highway seemed to stretch on forever, the miles passing by in a blur as the ringing continued to torment me. My mind raced with the possibility that I was being followed, not just by another vehicle, but by something far more sinister. The woman's hollow eyes and the ominous message replayed in my mind, amplifying my fear. Suddenly, the ringing stopped, leaving me in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than the storm itself. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady my nerves, when I saw it, a faint silhouette standing by the roadside, its form barely discernible in the early morning light. As I approached, the figure became clearer, revealing a man dressed in old-fashioned clothing, his face gaunt and his eyes empty pools of darkness. "Don't leave," he whispered, his voice echoing in my ears despite the distance between us. I slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt on the slick asphalt. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the figure, unable to comprehend what was happening. The man took a step forward, his movements slow and deliberate, as if tethered to the very ground beneath him. "Why won't you go?" I managed to stammer, fear overriding my rational thoughts. The man pointed towards the rest stop, his finger trembling. They are here. Don't go back. Before I could respond, the figure began to fade, dissolving into the morning mist as the sun's rays pierced through the darkness, dispelling the shadows that had haunted me for so long. I sat there, frozen, the weight of his words sinking in, knowing that I couldn't ignore the rest stop's sinister presence any longer. Determined to uncover the truth, I decided to return to rest stop 48, despite the unease gnawing at me. The drive back was nerve-wracking, each mile bringing me closer to the place where my nightmare had begun. As I approached, the rest stop looked the same as before, quiet, deserted, and shrouded in an otherworldly stillness. Parking my truck, I stepped out into the cold night, the snow crunching under my boots. The convenience store was closed, the neon sign flickering ominously. I approached the restroom, the memory of the scribbled message on the wall fresh in my mind. As I pushed open the door, the chill hit me once more, and the familiar words, "They are here. Don't go back," stared back at me, etched in the same shaky hand. Determined to get answers, I began searching the rest stop, checking every corner for any sign of the woman or the man who had warned me. The convenience store was locked, the vending machines untouched, and the only other building was the small diner, its windows dark and foreboding. As I entered the diner, the bell above the door jingled softly, the sound echoing through the empty space. The interior was dimly lit, the booths and tables covered in a thin layer of dust. I approached the counter, calling out, "Is anyone here?" Silence answered me, the oppressive atmosphere making it hard to breathe. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed something behind the counter, a flicker of movement, a shadow passing across the wall. My heart raced as I turned to face the source of the disturbance, but there was nothing there. Just the shadows dancing on the walls, playing tricks on my weary mind. Desperate for answers, I returned to the restroom, determined to uncover any clues about the rest stop's dark past. As I approached the door, a sudden gust of wind blew through, extinguishing the restroom's light. In the pitch-black darkness, I heard the faint sound of footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice echoing in the void. No response came, just the sound of footsteps stopping just outside the door. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pushed the door open. The restroom was empty, the only sign of recent activity the faint, lingering smell of smoke. I scanned the room, my eyes adjusting to the darkness, when I saw it, a faint outline of a figure standing by the sink, its presence unmistakable despite the lack of detail. "Don't go back," the figure whispered, its voice filled with anguish and desperation. I stumbled back, fear gripping me as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. The figure began to move towards me, the temperature dropping once more, the cold seeping into my very being. I turned to leave, but the door slammed shut, locking me inside with the restless spirit. "Please," the figure pleaded, reaching out a translucent hand. "Help us." I realized then that the rest stop was a nexus of lost souls, trapped in an eternal loop of fear and despair, their voices reaching out to anyone who dared to disturb their peace. The unsolved murder that had taken place years ago had left a lingering curse, binding the spirits to the rest stop and preventing them from finding solace. Summoning every ounce of courage, I decided to help the trapped souls find peace. I delved into the history of Rest Stop 48, uncovering stories of restless spirits and tragic deaths that had occurred there over the years. The more I learned, the more I understood the magnitude of the curse that bound the spirits to this desolate place. Armed with this knowledge, I began to perform rituals and prayers meant to release the spirits from their torment. Each night, I returned to the rest stop, the oppressive atmosphere gradually lifting as the spirits found solace in my efforts. The message on the restroom wall began to fade, replaced by words of gratitude and peace. One final night, as the first light of dawn began to break over the desert horizon, I performed the last of the rituals, the air around me growing warmer and filled with a sense of completion. The spirits, now free from their eternal torment, began to fade, their presence finally leaving the rest stop in peace. As I drove away from Rest Stop 48, the highway once again stretched out before me, the silence now comforting rather than oppressive. The snow-covered desert glistened in the morning light, the haunting memories of the night a distant echo in my mind. But deep down, I knew that the rest stop would always hold a special place in my heart, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of compassion in the face of the unknown. Years have passed since that harrowing night on Route 80, but the experience remains etched in my memory, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. The whispers of Rest Stop 48 serve as a warning to all who traverse these lonely highways. Some places hold onto their secrets tightly, and some spirits are desperate for peace, waiting for someone to listen. As I sit in my truck, watching the sun set over the Nevada desert, I can't help but feel a connection to the lost souls I helped release. Their whispers are now silent, their restless spirits finally finding the peace they were denied. The journey continues, but the legacy of Rest Stop 48 remains, a haunting yet inspiring tale of survival, courage, and the unyielding power of empathy in the face of supernatural horror. Story number 3. Eyes in the Fog. I've always found solace in the open road. The endless stretches of pavement, the rhythmic hum of my 18-wheeler's engine, and the ever-changing scenery outside my window have a way of calming my restless mind. But that night on the Blue Ridge Parkway, North Carolina, the road didn't offer the usual peace. Instead, it unfolded into a nightmare cloaked in thick, unrelenting fog. It was late October, the air crisp with the first whispers of fall. I was hauling freight from Atlanta to Asheville, eager to return to my family after a long week on the road. The Blue Ridge Parkway was renowned for its breathtaking views, especially when the autumn foliage painted the mountains in vibrant hues. However, tonight, the parkway was shrouded in an almost impenetrable blanket of mist, reducing visibility to mere feet. As I maneuvered my rig through the winding bends of the parkway, the headlights of my truck struggled to pierce the dense fog. The road ahead was eerily quiet, the usual sounds of wildlife and distant traffic swallowed by the heavy mist. My thoughts drifted to my wife, Mary, and our 2 kids, Michael and Emma, waiting for me at home. The anticipation of reuniting with them kept me focused, despite the growing unease that settled in my stomach. Around midnight, as I approached a particularly sharp curve, I noticed a truck moving slowly ahead of me. It was a standard 18-wheeler, its trailer painted a dull blue that blended almost seamlessly with the fog. What caught my attention, however, were the dark, crimson streaks that marred the side of the trailer. My heart pounded as I realized they were bloodstains, running down the metal like grotesque rivers. Damn, I muttered under my breath, feeling a surge of adrenaline. The sight was chilling, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was an accident, a spill from one of the cargo containers. Still, something about the way the truck was driving, slow and hesitant, didn't sit right with me. I decided to overtake, maneuvering my truck carefully to the left as the road narrowed. Just as I began to pass, a flicker in my rearview mirror caught my eye. Through the dim glow of my headlights, I saw a man sitting in the cabin of the truck I was passing. His presence was unsettling, but what horrified me was that he had no eyes. Where his eyes should have been, there were smooth, empty sockets that seemed to gaze right through me. Is this some kind of joke? I whispered to myself, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't move, didn't respond, just sat there, his presence a silent scream in the night. I pressed harder on the accelerator, determined to put distance between us. But as I rounded the curve, the truck ahead vanished as if swallowed by the fog itself. My heart raced, pounding against my ribs like a relentless drum. I glanced back, half expecting to see the truck still there, but it was gone, no trace, no sign, just the oppressive silence of the mist. Shaking off the fear, I continued driving, but the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, the fog closing in tighter with every mile. My thoughts kept drifting back to the man without eyes, wondering who he was and what happened to him. A few miles later, I saw a sign indicating the next rest stop up ahead. Relief washed over me. I needed to take a break, stretch my legs, and perhaps make some sense of what I'd just witnessed. I pulled into the empty parking lot, the rest stop's lights barely cutting through the fog. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way to the restroom, the cold air biting at my skin. The rest stop was deserted, the usual flicker of the fluorescent lights casting long, distorted shadows on the tiled floor. As I entered the restroom, the door creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the empty space. My flashlight beam swept across the mirror above the sink, revealing a chilling message scrawled in what looked like blood-red ink: "They are watching. Don't go back." A shiver ran down my spine. I turned to leave, but the restroom door slammed shut with a force that made me jump. The temperature inside dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air despite the still running heater. I fumbled with the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in as I realized I was trapped. The flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. My heart raced as a figure emerged from the darkness, another truck driver, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but his face was contorted in a silent scream, eyes darting back to the door as if warning me of impending doom. "Leave now," he mouthed silently, his gesture mirroring the warning in the mirror. But as quickly as he appeared, he vanished, leaving me alone in the oppressive cold and darkness. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. There had to be a way out. I focused on the door, tugging at it with all my might until it finally gave way, swinging open to reveal the still empty restroom. I stumbled out, shivering uncontrollably, and rushed back to my truck. But as I approached, I noticed something horrifying. The back of my trailer had been vandalized, fresh blood smears running down the metal like dark, sinister streams. My hands trembled as I reached for the keys, my mind racing with fear and confusion. What was happening? Who was after me? I climbed into the cab, heart pounding, and started the engine, hoping to drive away as quickly as possible. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw her, another woman, standing by the roadside, her eyes hollow and empty. She raised her hand, pointing directly at me, her mouth moving silently. "Don't leave me," she mouthed, her voice a haunting echo in my mind. The air inside the cab grew colder, the heater struggling to keep up with the sudden drop in temperature. I felt an invisible force pressing against the window, making it difficult to concentrate on the road ahead. I pressed harder on the accelerator, determined to escape, but the engine began to sputter, struggling against the onslaught of the cold. The road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the fog now a suffocating blanket that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly, the truck lurched violently, throwing me against the steering wheel. The engine died, and the headlights flickered off, plunging me into darkness. The whispers began then, faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. "Stay with us." The voices echoed, growing louder and more insistent. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal, no way to call for help. The whispers transformed into distant screams, the sound of agonized souls trapped in the fog. I knew I had to do something, but fear paralyzed me, keeping me rooted to the spot. As the minutes dragged on, the oppressive atmosphere continued to weigh down on me. The fog seemed to come alive, swirling around the truck in chaotic patterns, forming ghostly shapes that danced just beyond the edge of my vision. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, each one telling a different tale of horror and despair. In a desperate attempt to break free, I reached for the ignition, trying to restart the engine. But no matter how hard I tried, the truck remained dead, the fog closing in tighter with every passing second. I felt the presence of the spirits all around me, their cold fingers brushing against my skin, their sorrow and rage seeping into my very soul. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the silence returned. The fog began to lift, the voices fading into the night as the first light of dawn broke through the darkness. The oppressive cold lifted, replaced by a warmth that felt almost surreal after the night's torment. I took a deep breath, my heart still racing, and managed to start the engine. The truck roared to life, the headlights piercing through the remaining mist as I drove away from the rest stop, leaving the haunted stretch of Route 80 behind me. But the memory of that night lingered, etched into my mind like the bloodstains on the other truck's trailer. As I navigated the winding roads of the Blue Ridge Parkway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, the echoes of the spirits' whispers still haunting my thoughts. The beauty of the mountains, usually so serene, now seemed tainted by the darkness I had encountered. Every shadow, every flicker of movement in the fog, sent a chill down my spine, reminding me that some places hold onto their secrets tightly, their darkness ever present beneath the surface. Days turned into weeks, but the memory of that night never faded. I often found myself driving through the Blue Ridge Parkway, hoping to outrun the lingering presence of the spirits that had tried to claim me. But no matter how far I drove, the haunting images of the woman without eyes and the bloodstained truck remained, a constant reminder of the thin line between the living and the dead. I shared my story with friends and fellow truckers, but few believed me. Some dismissed it as a figment of a weary mind, others as a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But those who had driven those lonely stretches of the parkway knew better. They had heard the whispers, seen the shadows moving in the fog, and felt the cold presence of lost souls trapped in an eternal cycle of despair. Now, whenever I drive through the Blue Ridge Parkway on a foggy night, I keep a vigilant eye on the road ahead and a wary glance in my rearview mirror. I remind myself to stay focused, to push through the fatigue and the fear. But deep down, I know that the spirits are always there, watching, waiting for another soul to fall prey to their relentless torment. One night, as I drove through a particularly dense patch of fog, I noticed a figure standing by the roadside once again. It was a woman, similar to the one I had seen before, her dress flowing in the wind, her eyes empty and hollow. My heart raced as I slowed down, the chill in the air signaling that this encounter was far from over. "Hello?" I called out, my voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. The woman raised her hand, pointing directly at me, her mouth moving silently as if trying to convey a message I couldn't understand. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her sitting in the back seat, but there was nothing there, just the endless fog and the desolate highway stretching out before me. I pressed the accelerator, desperate to put distance between us, but the truck began to shake violently, the engine stuttering as if struggling against an unseen force. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before, filling the cabin with a cacophony of anguished voices. "Stay with us. Don't leave." They echoed, their sorrow and rage intertwining in a haunting melody that threatened to drive me mad. I reached for the phone, hoping against hope that I could call for help, but there was no signal, only the sound of my own rapid breathing and the relentless whispers that seemed to penetrate every corner of my mind. The woman's figure began to fade, dissolving into the fog as the first light of dawn started to break through the darkness. The whispers slowly ceased, leaving me in a suffocating silence that felt heavier than before. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and glanced back in the rearview mirror once more. This time, I saw nothing, no figure, no movement, just the empty road and the lingering presence of the fog. Determined to escape the nightmare that had haunted me for so long, I pushed the truck to full speed, the engine roaring as I sped down the highway. The Blue Ridge Parkway stretched out before me, the beauty of the mountains now a stark contrast to the horrors I had faced. The sun broke through the mist, casting a golden glow over the landscape and dispelling the shadows that had tormented me. But even as the road ahead seemed clear, I knew that the spirits of the Blue Ridge Parkway were never truly gone. They lingered in the fog, their whispers a constant reminder of the thin line between reality and the supernatural. The memory of that night, the bloodstains on the other truck, and the woman without eyes remained etched in my mind, a chilling testament to the darkness that can reside in the most beautiful of places. Years have passed since that fateful night, but the fear and the memory of the frostbound curse of Salem continue to haunt me. I've shared my story with a few trusted friends, but most dismiss it as the ravings of a tired mind. Still, every time I drive through the Blue Ridge Parkway, especially on foggy nights, I can't help but glance in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her once more, watching, waiting, a silent sentinel in the mist. The open road has always been my sanctuary, a place where I find freedom and peace. But now, it holds a different kind of terror, a reminder that some places are better left untouched, their secrets buried beneath layers of snow and time. The Blue Ridge Parkway, with its breathtaking beauty and haunting legends, stands as a testament to the enduring power of fear and the mysteries that lie hidden in the shadows. And so, I continue to drive, the road stretching out before me, knowing that the spirits of the Blue Ridge Parkway are always there, watching, waiting for the next weary traveler to uncover their chilling truths. The frostbound curse remains a dark chapter in my life, a story I carry with me on every mile, a reminder that some roads lead not just through space, but through the very depths of the human soul. Story number 4. Shadows on Chesapeake Bay Bridge. The hum of my 18-wheeler was the only sound breaking the stillness of the night as I navigated my rig onto the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Midnight was the dead of winter, and the sky was a blanket of inky black, punctuated only by the occasional flicker of distant headlights and the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the water below. The bridge, a mammoth structure connecting Maryland to Virginia, stretched out before me like a ribbon of steel and concrete, its length both awe-inspiring and intimidating. I'd driven this route countless times, the bridge a familiar sight in my rearview mirror as I hauled goods from the bustling ports of Baltimore to the quieter suburbs of Northern Virginia. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was the biting cold that seeped through every layer of my clothing, or perhaps the unease that settled in my gut as I approached the midpoint of the bridge. The weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but the oppressive silence of the night was unsettling, making every sound seem amplified. I glanced at the dashboard clock, 12:17 a.m. The bridge was mostly empty, save for a few late-night travelers and maintenance crews darting between rest stops. My radio crackled to life unexpectedly, startling me. I fumbled to turn it off, but the static was already giving way to a series of heavy, uneven breaths. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the sounds emanating from the speakers. "Hello? Is anyone there?" I called out, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Silence answered me, the static resuming its ominous presence. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. The fog that rolled in from the Chesapeake Bay clung to the bridge, swirling around the steel supports and obscuring my view of the road ahead. I adjusted the mirror, half expecting to see something, or someone, lurking just beyond the reach of my headlights. That's when I saw him. A man stood in the middle of the bridge, his figure barely visible through the dense fog. He wore a worn, tattered raincoat, the fabric soaked and clinging to his gaunt frame. His eyes, dark and hollow, stared blankly into the void, and his presence exuded a palpable sense of despair. I slowed down, my instincts urging me to proceed with caution. "Hey, are you okay?" I called out again, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. He didn't respond. Instead, he stood motionless, as if waiting for something or someone. The heavy breathing from the radio seemed to sync with his silent vigil, creating an eerie harmony that sent chills down my spine. I reached for the steering wheel, considering whether to pull over and offer assistance. But something deep inside me hesitated, an unspoken fear that kept me moving forward. I pressed down on the accelerator, my truck inching closer to the spectral figure. As I approached, the man suddenly turned and, with a swift, desperate motion, leaped off the bridge into the fog below. My heart lurched in my chest as I watched him disappear into the darkness, the radio's breath still echoing in my ears. I slammed on the brakes, the truck screeching to a halt just inches from where he had stood. Breathing heavily, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking as I waited for a connection. "I need to report a possible accident on the Chesapeake Bay Bridge," I said, my voice trembling. There was a man, he jumped off the bridge into the fog. There was a moment of silence before the dispatcher responded. "Stay on the line. Officers are being dispatched to your location. Can you describe the individual?" I tried to steady my voice, focusing on the details. He was wearing a raincoat, old and tattered. I couldn't see his face clearly, but his eyes were empty. "Understood. Please remain in your vehicle and ensure your safety." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. As I hung up, I felt a surge of guilt and worry. Who was he? Was he suicidal? Or was there something more sinister at play? Determined to understand what had happened, I decided to get out of the truck and search for any clues. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out onto the bridge, the cold night air biting at my skin. The bridge was deserted, the only sound the distant waves crashing against the pillars below. I made my way toward the spot where the man had stood, my flashlight cutting through the thick fog. The ground was damp, and the remnants of the man's presence were subtle, a few footprints leading to the edge and then fading into the mist. I followed them, my footsteps crunching on the gravel, until I reached the railing overlooking the water. The area around the railing was slippery, covered in ice, making each step a cautious endeavor. I crouched down, shining my light toward the water, but all I saw was the endless darkness below. The man was gone, leaving behind only questions and an unsettling sense of loss. I stood up, my mind racing with thoughts of the restless spirit that might still linger on the bridge. As I turned to leave, the air grew colder, the temperature dropping sharply despite the heater still running in my truck. I felt a chill run down my spine, an invisible presence pressing down on me. Turning back to look at the spot where the man had stood, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Wet handprints covered the side of my truck, smudged and streaked as if someone had tried desperately to climb up. I stared at them, my mind struggling to comprehend how they had appeared. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. The feeling of being watched intensified, the fog seeming to close in tighter around me. I backed away, heart pounding, and rushed back to my truck, fumbling with the doors as the chill wrapped around me like a suffocating blanket. As I settled back into the cab, my eyes darted to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the man's hollow gaze staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the endless expanse of the bridge and the fog. Shaking, I decided to leave the bridge, eager to put distance between myself and the haunting encounter. As I drove away, the night seemed to grow darker, the fog thicker, making it difficult to see the road ahead. My mind raced with thoughts of the man and the eerie events that had unfolded, but I tried to push them aside, focusing on the road and the promise of reaching home. But as I neared the next bend, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror, a fleeting shadow moving just behind my truck, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I pressed the accelerator, my nerves frayed as I sped down the highway, but the feeling of being followed persisted, a constant reminder of the night's events. I pulled over at the next rest stop, the lights dim and the area deserted. My hands shook as I turned off the engine, trying to calm my racing heart. I glanced around, but there was no sign of the man or any other vehicle. The rest stop was silent, the only sound the distant call of an owl and the whisper of the wind through the trees. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to steady my breathing, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from an unknown number, the screen displaying only a single word, "Don't." My blood ran cold as I stared at the message, the implications sinking in. Was it a warning? A threat? I had no idea, but the fear it invoked was undeniable. I quickly gathered my belongings, eager to leave the rest stop and put the nightmare behind me. As I drove away, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, the bridge now a dark silhouette in the distance. The message on my phone haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge were still watching, waiting for their next unwitting victim. The days that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and restless thoughts. I couldn't forget the man without eyes, the wet handprints on my truck, or the ominous message that had appeared out of nowhere. The experience left me shaken, questioning the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the mysteries that lie hidden on America's most iconic highways. I tried to share my story with friends and fellow truckers, but few believed me. Some dismissed it as a figment of a weary mind, while others speculated about the bridge's dark history. According to local lore, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge had been the site of numerous tragedies, from suicides to mysterious disappearances, each incident adding to the bridge's haunted reputation. But to me, it was more than just a series of unfortunate events. It was a reminder that some places hold onto their secrets tightly, their shadows ever present beneath the surface. One evening, as I sat alone in my truck, the weight of the night's events pressing down on me, I made a decision. I couldn't let fear control me, but I also couldn't ignore the signs that something otherworldly was at play. I began researching the bridge's history, delving into old records and newspaper archives, piecing together the stories of those who had vanished or been lost to the bridge's dark embrace. What I discovered was a tapestry of sorrow and mystery, each thread weaving a tale of lost souls and unfulfilled desires. The bridge had become a beacon for those seeking an escape from their pain, a final crossing to a place where they believed they could find peace. But instead, many found themselves trapped in an eternal loop of despair, their spirits bound to the bridge, reliving their last moments in an endless cycle. Determined to understand and perhaps help, I reached out to local historians and paranormal experts, seeking insights into the bridge's haunting phenomena. Most dismissed my inquiries, attributing the reports to overactive imaginations and the isolation of the highway. But a few took my story seriously, sharing tales of unexplained events and apparitions that had been reported by other drivers over the years. One expert, a retired police officer named Mike Thompson, offered to meet me at a local diner to discuss the bridge's history. His eyes held a mixture of skepticism and intrigue as we sat across from each other, sipping coffee and sharing our experiences. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge has always been a place of mystery, Mike began, leaning back in his chair. Over the years, we've had reports of people seeing apparitions, hearing strange noises, and even feeling an overwhelming sense of dread while driving over it at night. Some say it's the spirits of those who couldn't move on, while others believe there's something more sinister at play. I nodded, eager to hear more. I saw a man without eyes, heard heavy breathing on my radio, and then this message on my phone. It feels like the bridge is reaching out to me, trying to communicate. Mike frowned, his expression thoughtful. There are legends about the bridge being a portal between the living and the dead. Maybe what you encountered was a spirit trying to make contact or warn you about something. It's not uncommon for places with tragic histories to develop a kind of energy that attracts paranormal activity. I shivered, the memories of that night flooding back. Do you think there's a way to break the cycle, to help these spirits find peace? Mike took a sip of his coffee, contemplating my question. It's difficult. The key is to understand what keeps them bound to the bridge. Sometimes, rituals or memorials can help, acknowledging their existence and offering closure. But it's not a guaranteed solution. Determined to find answers, I spent the next few weeks immersing myself in the bridge's lore, talking to locals, and documenting my experiences. I drove the bridge multiple times, hoping to encounter something that could provide further insight. Each trip reinforced the bridge's eerie reputation, the thick fog and desolate surroundings creating a perfect backdrop for the supernatural. One night, driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I decided to perform a simple ritual of acknowledgement. I parked my truck at the midpoint of the bridge, the spot where I had seen the man without eyes. I lit a candle, placing it on the guardrail as a symbol of respect and a gesture of peace. "Are you there?" I whispered into the darkness, my voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. "I see you. I acknowledge your presence. Please find peace." For a moment, nothing happened. The night remained still, the fog swirling gently around me. But then, the temperature began to drop once more, the air growing colder as if my words had stirred something ancient and restless. The radio in my truck crackled to life, the heavy breathing sounds returning, louder this time, filled with a sense of urgency. I felt a presence behind me, turning to see the man without eyes standing just a few feet away, his hollow gaze fixed on me. "Don't leave us," he mouthed, his voice echoing in my mind like a ghostly refrain. "Help us." Tears welled up in my eyes as I realized the depth of their torment. "I'm trying to help," I replied, my voice breaking. "Please, let me know what I can do." The air around us seemed to shimmer, the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring as the spirits reached out to me, their ethereal forms swirling in the fog. I felt their pain, their longing for release, and knew that the bridge held secrets that needed to be uncovered and respected. As dawn broke over the horizon, the fog began to lift, and the spirits gradually faded, their presence lingering like the remnants of a long-forgotten dream. The man without eyes gave a final, silent nod before disappearing into the morning light, leaving me alone with the knowledge that I had made a small difference in their eternal plight. Driving away from the bridge, the early morning sun casting a golden glow over the water, I felt a sense of closure and peace. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge, once a symbol of isolation and tragedy, now stood as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the possibility of redemption, even in the face of unimaginable horror. But the memory of that night remains, a chilling reminder of the shadows that lurk in the most unexpected places and the enduring power of compassion to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge continues to watch over the waters below, its steel arches holding stories of sorrow and hope, waiting for the next weary traveler to uncover its haunting truths. And so, I continue my journey, a solitary figure on the endless highways of America, forever changed by the whispers and shadows of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, a place where the veil between worlds is thin, and the echoes of lost souls still resonate in the stillness of the night. Story number 5. Whispers at Desert Station. The sun had long dipped below the horizon by the time I decided to take Route 50, Nevada, the infamous loneliest road in America. As a long-haul trucker, I was no stranger to solitude, but this stretch of highway was a different beast altogether. It was December, and the chill in the air was biting, making every mile feel longer than the last. My rig was loaded with freight bound for Los Angeles, a journey that usually took a week or more. But tonight, exhaustion gnawed at my bones, urging me to find a place to rest. I'd driven this route countless times, the desolate landscape stretching endlessly around me, punctuated only by the occasional distant light of a town. But tonight was different. The weather had taken a turn for the worse, with heavy snowfall predicted for the next few days. I was running low on fuel and desperate for a break before the storm hit. That's when I saw it, a lone gas station perched at the edge of the highway, its sign flickering weakly against the encroaching darkness. As I approached, the gas station seemed almost surreal, a relic from another era. The building was old, its paint peeling and windows clouded with grime. The canopy above the pumps was rusted, swaying gently in the wind. A solitary light burned inside, casting a dim glow that barely illuminated the interior. My phone had no signal, and I knew there was no one else for miles. With a sigh of relief, I pulled into one of the pumps, the engine of my truck growling as it settled onto the icy ground. I grabbed a fuel can from the truck's compartment, the metal cold to the touch. The attendant was nowhere to be seen. Curious, I glanced around the station, noting the absence of any movement. No one seemed to be around, despite the light that suggested someone might be inside. Shrugging it off as my imagination playing tricks on me, I began filling up the tank. As the fuel flowed into the tank, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The station was eerily quiet, the only sounds the distant howl of the wind and the occasional creak of the old building settling into the night. I glanced up, searching for any sign of the attendant, but the spot where he should have been was empty. Shaking my head, I continued to refuel, my thoughts drifting to the warmth of my home and the promise of a hot meal waiting for me there. With the tank finally full, I wiped my hands on my pants and decided it was time to leave. As I stepped back into the truck, I noticed a chill that had nothing to do with the cold weather. The temperature inside the cab dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frosty air despite the heater running at full blast. I frowned, puzzled by the sudden drop in temperature. Shrugging it off as a minor malfunction, I turned the key to start the engine. The engine sputtered to life, but before I could move, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. In the rearview mirror, standing directly in front of my cab, was the gas station attendant. His presence was ghostly, almost translucent, and his face was grotesquely distorted, his features twisted unnaturally, and most horrifying of all, his eyes were completely absent. They were smooth, empty sockets that seemed to stare right through me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The attendant didn't move, didn't speak, he just stood there, a silent sentinel in the rearview mirror. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, hoping to dispel the terrifying vision. When I opened them again, he was still there, his form unwavering and his empty eyes piercing through the darkness. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. He didn't respond. Instead, he raised a hand, a silent gesture that seemed to hold an unspoken warning. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. Was I hallucinating? The exhaustion from the long drive must be catching up with me, I thought, desperate to rationalize the apparition. But then, something even more unsettling happened. The fuel gauge on my dashboard, which had been full minutes ago, was now inexplicably empty. I glanced down, my eyes widening in disbelief. "What the hell?" I muttered, staring at the needle that had plummeted from full to empty in an instant. I reached for my phone, hoping to call for help, but there was no signal, just the persistent static that seemed to hum with malevolent energy. Panic began to set in as I realized that something was terribly wrong. The temperature in the cab continued to drop, the cold seeping into my bones despite the heater's futile attempts to keep me warm. Desperate to escape, I tried to start the engine again, but the truck remained stubbornly silent. The presence of the attendant in the mirror grew more intense, his empty eyes seeming to follow my every move. The oppressive silence of the gas station now felt suffocating, the air thick with an unseen force pressing down on me. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the glass of the rearview mirror, as if trying to feel some connection or break the spell. The surface was cold and unyielding, reflecting my terrified expression back at me. Suddenly, the air was filled with a low, mournful wail, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the gas station. The attendant began to fade, his form becoming more transparent, but his presence remained, a haunting reminder of the unseen horrors that lurked on this lonely stretch of road. I pulled the emergency brake, the truck jerking to a halt as I tried to make sense of the unfolding nightmare. Just then, the front door of the gas station swung open with a force that shook the entire building. The attendant reappeared, now fully solid but still with his horrifying, eyeless face. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, a living nightmare amidst the desolate highway. I gathered my courage, knowing that I had to leave this place no matter what. But as I tried to step out of the truck, the door wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I struggled against the invisible force that held me captive, the wails of the attendant growing louder, more desperate. "Please, don't leave," the attendant mouthed, his voice echoing in my mind, a ghostly plea that sent shivers down my spine. I screamed, trying to force the door open, but it remained stubbornly locked. The temperature in the cab continued to plummet, my breath now forming ice crystals in the air. The gas station attendant began to circle the truck, his presence both terrifying and mesmerizing, his empty eyes never leaving mine. In a last-ditch effort to escape, I slammed my head against the glass of the mirror, the pain momentarily distracting me from the terror that consumed me. The attendant recoiled, his form wavering like a candle flame in the wind. Seizing the opportunity, I pulled the emergency brake and dove out of the cab, sprinting toward the exit with all my might. The snow-covered ground made my footing slippery, each step a struggle against the icy terrain. Behind me, I could hear the sound of the attendant's wails growing louder, his presence chasing me through the desolate gas station. My legs burned with exhaustion, but fear propelled me forward, driving me to put as much distance between myself and the haunted place as possible. I ran until my legs could carry me no further, collapsing onto the side of the road, gasping for breath as the dawn began to break over the horizon. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the fog, dispelling the darkness that had enveloped the gas station. The heat of the morning sun slowly warmed my frozen body, the nightmare of the night fading into a distant memory. But even as I lay there, drenched in sweat and shivering from the lingering cold, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me from the gas station. The shadows on the road seemed to move with a life of their own, and the empty highway stretched out before me like an endless corridor of silence and fear. I struggled to my feet, my mind racing with questions. What had happened at that gas station? Who was the attendant, and why did he haunt this lonely stretch of road? I knew one thing for certain: I had to get out of here before the darkness of the night returned, bringing with it the unseen horrors that lurked just beyond the reach of my headlights. As I climbed back into my truck, I noticed that the fuel gauge was still inexplicably empty. Panic gripped me once more as I realized that I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no way to refuel and no sign of civilization for miles. The radio was still dead, the engine refusing to cooperate, leaving me with no choice but to wait until the morning brought the warmth of daylight and the possibility of assistance. Hours passed in agonizing silence, the sun climbing higher in the sky as the cold of the night slowly gave way to the warmth of day. I sat in my truck, the memory of the haunted gas station still vivid in my mind, the empty highway stretching out before me like a ghostly reminder of the horrors that can dwell in the most unexpected places. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, I saw a distant light flickering on the horizon. Relief surged through me as I realized it was a small town, its lights a beacon of civilization in the vast desert. I started the engine, the truck finally responding to my pleas, and began the long drive to the town, eager to leave the haunted stretch of Route 50 behind. But as I drove away, I couldn't help but glance back in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the ghostly attendant watching me from the shadows. Instead, there was nothing, just the endless stretch of highway and the promise of a new day. I reached the town without further incident, the gas station now a distant memory shrouded in the fog of fear and exhaustion. I found a motel, checked in, and settled into a warm bed, the horrors of the night finally allowing me to drift into a much-needed sleep. But even now, months later, I can't fully erase the memory of that night. The image of the eyeless attendant, the oppressive cold, and the haunting messages left me with a lingering sense of unease. Route 50 remains a testament to the loneliness and isolation that can drive people to the brink, a road where the past and the present collide in a dance of shadows and whispers. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet of the night, I can still hear the faint echoes of the attendant's pleas, a ghostly reminder that some places hold onto their secrets tightly, their darkness ever present beneath the surface. The loneliest road in America lives up to its name, a stretch of highway where the living and the dead intertwine, their stories forever etched into the fabric of the desert night. And so, as I continue my journeys across this vast country, I carry with me the haunting memories of that night on Route 50, a chilling reminder that even in the most desolate places, the past can reach out and touch the present, leaving behind whispers of sorrow and shadows that linger long after the dawn breaks.